A second look at Emmaus. For years, the story of the walk to Emmaus fascinated me. In fact, it was one of the first topics I wrote about when I started doing articles. What is really cool, though, is when in one weekend, Jesus can take a story that you've heard 500,000 times and shine the light on it differently so that it looks totally new. Like a diamond reflecting light from a different cut angle, it will take your breath away with how beautiful it is, and more so with the intriguing depth that can hide in one little nugget of truth. That was what happened to me this weekend with the story of Emmaus. The awesome thing to me is how many different perspectives God gave me so that I could see more hidden insights held in that story than I ever had in the past. It started the night before I even went to church. My friend who is teaching Sunday school called and asked if I had any insights to give her on what she might use to teach the Road to Emmaus story the next morning. Of course, I led with the thoughts recounted in my previous article about what it meant that the friends of Jesus didn't recognize him as they walked. I said that's often how we are, in that we don't recognize Jesus in those who are walking this journey of life with us. We think of them as only our friend or our spouse or our child. Too often, we fail to recognize Jesus in them. As we talked, I offered a few more thoughts, and then we hung up. The next morning, my family traveled to the town where my sister lives for her oldest boy's first communion. The priest giving the homily took a different look at it. He said that to understand the story, you had to know that Emmaus was a seat of Roman power at the time. The biblical significance of that is that these two disciples were walking away from Jerusalem and Jesus and toward the Roman power. It wasn't until Jesus went and got them, showed them who he was and that he was alive, that they turned back and went back to Jerusalem. Interesting. I'd never heard the story from that perspective. Later that day, talking with my dad about the sermon they had heard at their church on the same reading, he gave me a slightly different take on it. He said that their priest had said the disciples were not walking away to Emmaus, as in having a casual stroll for no good reason. No, they were escaping. They were running, or walking really fast, from all that had happened in Jerusalem. Then, as I put them all together, I saw what God so often does when we really take the time to look. I saw the layers of parallel meaning form, so that what was happening in the physical realm paralleled the mental and emotional, which paralleled the spiritual. Here were these two disciples. They were walking away. They had turned their backs, literally, on Jerusalem, and thus on Jesus and the whole idea of Christianity. They had seen what happened to Christ, and they physically wanted no part of that, so they were getting the heck out of Dodge, so to speak. In the spiritual realm, they decided that Christianity wasn't worth it, so they were going to head toward what in worldly terms looked safe, the Roman command post. They were not only walking away from Christianity, they were walking toward the empty promises of the world. And then Jesus showed up. And they didn't see him being Jesus, just as we often don't see him when he shows up after we have strayed. He's come to invite us to come back, but we are so caught up in ourselves that we fail to recognize him. Sure, we hear the song that touches our hearts and calls us back, yet we don't recognize that song as being Jesus walking with us even in our hurt and fear. Instead, we keep walking, thinking that something in the world is going to fix what's wrong in our lives. Still, he walks with us, stride for stride, until maybe we've gone the whole 7 miles into the heart of the world. At that point, it seems that he plans to continue on with his journey, because he is not going to stay where he isn't wanted. But then, for whatever reason, we say, no, stop here. Stay the evening with us. And so he does, willingly, gladly. In fact, that's what he was hoping we would say all along. We sit down with him at supper, and it isn't until he takes the bread and breaks himself again for us that we recognize who it is that has been with us all along. At that moment, we jump for joy. Our hearts leap inside us because we realize that where we are, in the hurt and the fear of the world, is not where we have to stay. No, we have the option to go back to Jerusalem, to be with Jesus each and every moment. Of course, that was always an option. It's just that sometimes that option looks so tough that walking into the world begins to look like an easier choice. Rest assured, not a mile down that road, Jesus will show up. He will walk with you and talk with you, and then he will gently invite you back. Wow, how cool is that? Just makes me wonder what Jesus has in store for me on the third look at the Emmaus story sometime in the future. I know I will forever be grateful for this second look. It taught me so much about the extent of his love for each of us. It's so awesome that he is willing to walk that road to Emmaus every time circumstances make us think that going in the direction of the world looks like a good idea. I, for one, will now remember that going to Emmaus solves nothing. It's Jerusalem where I want to be. How about you? 2005.
Reflections on Life, written by Staci Stallings. Copyright Staci Stallings 2005. Narrated by Michaela Acker. Production copyright Staci Stallings 2023. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.